The great hall of the Galactic Assembly was dying, not in flame or violence, but in silence. Empty seats stretched in every direction like graves, and the few representatives who remained spoke in whispers, as if loud voices might attract the attention of what was coming. Stood near the back of the chamber, watching the holographic displays that floated above the central platform. Each display showed a different world. Each world was burning. She had been Earth's ambassador to the Assembly for only 2 years, and in that time she had learned that the galaxy was vast and ancient and full of wonders. Now she was learning that it was also full of fear. The moderator stood at the center of the platform. It was a being made of living crystal, and its body usually glowed with soft blue light. But today that light was dim, flickering like a candle in the wind. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 12,000 years of galactic peace that was now crumbling to dust. "The collective of minds has sealed their borders," the moderator announced. "They will not send aid. They will not accept refugees. They have chosen to wait and hope the swarm passes them by." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The collective was one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. If they were hiding, what hope did anyone else have? "The hegemony has done the same," the moderator continued. "As have the Sung Empire, the Bright Union, and the children of the First Star. Our alliance is breaking." Looked around at the remaining representatives. She saw fear in their eyes. She saw despair. She saw beings who had already accepted death, and she understood why. The Void Swarm was not an enemy that could be reasoned with or fought in any traditional sense. It was more like a force of nature, a darkness that moved between the stars and consumed everything in its path. Entire civilizations had vanished in weeks. Fleets of thousands had been swallowed without slowing the swarm down at all. "What of the younger species?" someone asked. "What of the humans?" The question was almost mocking. Humanity had joined the Assembly only 300 years ago, which made them children by galactic standards. Their technology was primitive. Their fleet was small. There was a single planet on the edge of nowhere, so far from the galactic center that most species had never bothered to learn its name. Earth. Such a simple word for such a small place. Stepped forward. She felt the eyes of the chamber turn toward her, and she saw the dismissal in those eyes. The pity. The certainty that whatever she was about to say would be meaningless. "Earth has a response," she said. The moderator's light flickered. "Ambassador, we appreciate humanity's enthusiasm, but this is not a matter for symbolic gestures. The swarm has destroyed civilizations that were ancient when your species still lived in caves. What can Earth possibly offer?" Activated her personal display. The holographic image expanded to fill the center of the chamber, and suddenly the representatives were not looking at burning worlds anymore. They were looking at Earth. They were looking at shipyards working day and night, at factories producing weapons, at millions of people lining up at recruitment centers. They were looking at a species preparing for war. "Everything," said. "Earth offers everything." The chamber fell silent. Even the moderator's light stopped flickering. "You cannot be serious," someone said. "Your fleet numbers in the hundreds, the swarm numbers in the billions. You would be throwing your lives away." "Yes," agreed, "we probably would." "Then why would you do this?" Thought about that question. She thought about the messages she had received from home in the past week. Messages from her mother, who was too old to fight but had volunteered to work in the medical stations. Messages from her younger brother, who had enlisted in the Navy the day after the first reports of the swarm arrived. Messages from friends and strangers, all of them saying the same thing: "We're coming. We don't care about the odds. We're coming." "Because someone has to," she said simply. "Because the galaxy is full of people who deserve to live. Because we refuse to accept that the only response to darkness is to hide and wait for death." She looked around the chamber at the empty seats, at the representatives who had abandoned their posts, at the civilizations that had chosen despair over hope. "You have all been spacefaring for thousands of years," she continued. You have technologies we can barely understand. You have fleets that dwarf ours. And yet when the swarm came, you ran, you hid, you gave up." Her voice hardened. "Humanity has been among the stars for 3 centuries. We are young and small and weak by your standards, but we are not cowards, and we do not abandon others to die alone." The moderator's light pulsed. "Ambassador, you understand that this is likely suicide, that your entire species could be extinguished." "We understand." "And you will still fight." Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with death and found that peace was not surrender but freedom. "We will still fight. The question is whether anyone will fight beside us." The chamber remained silent. The representatives looked at each other, then at their displays, then at the floor. No one spoke. No one moved. Nodded slowly. She had expected this. She had hoped for more, but she had expected this. "Very well," she said. "Humanity will face the swarm alone, but I want you all to remember this moment. When the universe required heroes, when the darkness came and the light was failing, you chose to hide, and humanity chose to stand." She turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silence of the dying hall. Behind her, the moderator's voice called out, "Ambassador, how long until your fleet is ready?" She paused at the door. 30 days. "That is not enough time. The swarm will reach the outer colonies in 20. Looked back at the ancient crystal being, at the fading light of a galaxy that had given up on itself. "Then we will meet them there," she said, "and we will buy you time, all of you, even though you do not deserve it." She walked out into the corridor beyond, and the doors closed behind her. In her pocket, her communication device buzzed with a message from Earth. It was from her brother. "We're ready," it said. "Come home, let's go save the universe." Read the message twice. Then she began to run. Captain had served in the Earth Navy for 30 years. He had commanded patrol ships and cargo escorts. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and rescued colonists from failing stations. He thought he had seen everything that space could show him. But as he stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Endurance, he realized he had been wrong. The fleet assembled in the shadow of Saturn's rings was unlike anything in human history. It was not a military fleet in any traditional sense. It was something stranger and more beautiful. It was humanity itself, gathered together and pointed at the stars. Watched as another group of ships joined the formation. These were not warships. They were fishing vessels from the coastal cities of Korea, their hulls reinforced with armor plating and their nets replaced with missile launchers. Behind them came luxury yachts from the wealthy colonies of Mars, donated by their owners and crewed by volunteers. Behind them came cargo ships and passenger liners and mining vessels and research stations that had been pulled from orbit and converted into mobile weapons platforms. His first officer, Lieutenant, stood beside him with a tablet in her hands. She was young, barely 30, but she had the calm eyes of someone who had already accepted what was coming. "Final count," she said. 14,217 vessels, 42 million personnel. Shook his head slowly. "Personnel, that's a strange word for them." "What would you call them, sir?" He thought about the crew manifests he had reviewed that morning. Teachers and farmers, engineers and artists, grandparents who had flown shuttles in the early days of space exploration and teenagers who had never left Earth before. None of them were required to be here. There had been no draft, no conscription. Earth's government had simply broadcast the call and people had come. "Volunteers," he said. "I would call them volunteers, every single one of them." A message appeared on his tablet. She read it and frowned. "The assembly observers are confused again. They keep asking where our professional military is. They don't understand why civilians are crewing warships." "What did you tell them?" "I told them this is our professional military. Everyone who could hold a weapon or pilot a ship." Smiled grimly. The assembly observers had been attached to his fleet for a week now, and they still could not understand what they were seeing. Their civilizations had standing armies, professional soldiers who trained for decades before seeing combat. The idea of ordinary people volunteering to die was beyond their comprehension. But that was the difference between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. When the call went out, humans answered, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. The door to the observation deck opened and turned to see an old woman enter. She was small and gray-haired, and she wore an outdated flight suit that had clearly been pulled out of storage. But her eyes were sharp, and her movements were steady. "Captain," she asked, I've been assigned to your ship as a shuttle pilot." Blinked, how old are you?" 74. I flew cargo shuttles in the Mars colony days. Haven't been in space for 20 years, but I still remember how to pilot, and I figured you could use every hand you've got." He wanted to tell her to go home. He wanted to tell her that this was a young person's fight, that she had already done her part. But then he looked at her eyes and saw the same thing he saw in everyone's eyes these days: the quiet determination, the refusal to let others face the darkness alone. "Welcome aboard," he said instead. "Report to the shuttle bay. We launch in 6 hours." Nodded and walked away, watched her go, and he felt something tight in his chest. Sir asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." He turned back to the viewport. Another wave of ships was arriving, these ones from the colonies in the outer system. Mining vessels and ice haulers, their crews waving at the fleet as they took their positions. "I was just thinking about what we're doing." "Having second thoughts?" "No, I was thinking about how proud I am, of all of them." He gestured at the fleet, at the thousands of ships crewed by millions of ordinary people who had chosen to be heroes. The galaxy looks at us and sees primitives. They see a young species with crude technology and a single small. They don't understand why we're doing this. "Do you understand, sir?" Thought about his daughter, who was 9 years old and waiting on Earth with her mother. He thought about the message he had recorded for her that morning, the one that would be delivered if he didn't come back. He thought about all the other parents in the fleet who had recorded similar messages, all the children who might grow up without mothers and fathers. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I do. We're doing this because the universe is full of people who deserve to live. We're doing this because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light, and if no one else will do it," he shrugged, "then it falls to us." His communication device buzzed. It was a fleet-wide message from Admiral, the commander of the entire operation. "All vessels, this is Admiral. The swarm has entered the outer colonies. They are ahead of schedule. We launch in 1 hour. I know many of you are scared. I know many of you have never seen combat, but I also know what you're made of. You are human. And today we show the universe what that means. Out." She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Then slowly straightened his uniform and walked toward the bridge. Behind him, through the viewport, 14,000 ships began to move. They were not the finest vessels in the galaxy. They were not crewed by professional soldiers, but they were enough. They had to be enough. Because they were all that stood between the darkness and everything humanity had ever loved. The planet had no name anymore. It had been called 442b once, home to a civilization of gentle beings who had built cities of living crystal and spent their days creating art and music. Now it was just gray dust and silence. The swarm had passed through 3 days ago, and nothing remained. Doctor stepped off the shuttle and felt her boots sink into the ash. The air was breathable but empty, stripped of any scent or moisture. She had studied xenobiology for 20 years, had hundreds of alien ecosystems, but she had never seen anything like this. The swarm did not just kill, it erased. It consumed everything so completely that not even bones remained. "Stay close," said Sergeant, stepping off the shuttle behind her. He was a tall man with a face and careful eyes. His rifle was already raised, scanning the horizon. "We have 30 minutes. Then we're leaving whether you're ready or not." Nodded and activated her scanner. The fleet had sent them here to gather information, to find any weakness in the swarm that could be exploited. It was a desperate mission, but everything was desperate now. The swarm was moving faster than anyone had predicted, and humanity's fleet was still 2 days away from the battle zone. She walked across the dead landscape, her scanner beeping softly. The readings were strange. The ground should have contained minerals, organic compounds, the remains of whatever had lived here. But there was nothing, just silicon and carbon in their most basic forms. It was as if the planet had been reduced to raw elements. Doctor called, "We don't have time for sightseeing." "I'm not sightseeing. I'm trying to understand what we're fighting." "We're fighting monsters. What else is there to understand?" Stopped walking. She had been thinking about that question for weeks, ever since the first reports of the swarm arrived. Everyone called them monsters, but that was not quite right. Monsters were alive. Monsters had desires and fears and weaknesses. The swarm was something different. "They're not alive," she said slowly, speaking more to herself than to. "Not in any way we understand. They're more like a process, a function, like entropy given form." "Doctor, I don't know what that means." "It means they don't eat because they're hungry. They don't kill because they want to. They simply convert. Everything they touch becomes more of them. They're not an army, they're a wave, a tide." She looked at her scanner again. Something in the readings was bothering her, something she could not quite identify. The swarm had passed through here, had consumed everything on the surface. But the deeper readings showed something different. The planet's core was still intact. The magnetic field was still functioning. "That doesn't make sense," she muttered. "What doesn't?" "The planet is still here. The swarm consumed everything on the surface, but they didn't touch the core. Why would they leave it?" Before could answer, the ground shook, looked up and felt her heart stop. The sky was darkening, not with clouds but with shapes, millions of them descending from orbit like a black rain. The swarm had returned. "Back to the shuttle," ordered. He grabbed his arm and started running. Now. But could not move. She was watching the shapes descend, watching the way they moved, and suddenly she understood. "They're not walking," she breathed. "They're floating, they don't touch the ground." "Doctor, we need to go." "The magnetic field, they can't handle it. That's why they didn't touch the core." Her mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. High-gravity worlds, strong magnetic fields, unstable planetary cores. They can't function in those environments. She turned to, her eyes wide. "I know how to hurt them." The first of the swarm touched down 100 meters away. It was not what it expected. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth. It was just a shape, a darkness that seemed to drink the light around it, and it was moving toward them. "Run," said, "tell me while we run." They ran. The shuttle was 300 meters away, its engines already warming up. Behind them, the swarm spread across the landscape like spilled ink, consuming the gray dust and growing larger with every moment. "Electromagnetic pulses," gasped as she ran. "Gravitational weapons, anything that disrupts their structure at a fundamental level. They're not organic, they're something else, something that depends on stable physics to function." "Will regular weapons work?" "No, maybe, I don't know." She stumbled and caught her arm, pulling her forward. "But I know what won't work. Conventional attacks, trying to destroy them one by one. There are too many and they regenerate too fast." The shuttle loomed ahead of them. The pilot, a young woman named, was standing at the door, waving frantically. "Get in," she screamed. "They're right behind you." Did not look back. She could feel the swarm behind her, could feel the temperature dropping as they approached. She threw herself through the shuttle door and collapsed on the floor, landed beside her. The door slammed shut. "Go," shouted, "go now." The shuttle lurched upward. Through the window, watched the swarm spread across the place where they had been standing. The shapes reached up toward the shuttle, stretching like shadows, but they could not quite touch it. "They can't fly high," said. Gravity pulls them down, that's another weakness. Stared at her. His face was pale and his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. You really think you can help the fleet kill these things? Thought about the data on her scanner. She thought about the patterns she had seen, the weaknesses she had identified. It was not much. It was probably not enough, but it was something. I don't know if we can kill them, she said honestly, but I know we can hurt them now, and that's more than anyone else has managed. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere and climbed toward the waiting ship above. Below them, the dead planet turned slowly in the darkness, another victim of the swarm. But perhaps, thought, not the last. Admiral had never been afraid of death. She had faced it many times in her 40 years of service, and she had made peace with it long ago. But standing on the bridge of the Endurance, watching the tactical display fill with red, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt small. The swarm appeared on the display as a wave of crimson light, stretching from one edge of the screen to the other. There were so many of them that the computer could not count them individually. It simply displayed a number with too many zeros. 100 billion, her tactical officer whispered. At least 100 billion individual units. Nodded slowly. Her fleet had 14,000 ships, 42 million people. They were outnumbered by a factor of more than 1,000 to 1. Behind her, through the rear viewport, Earth hung in the darkness. Blue and green and white, impossibly beautiful, impossibly fragile. 8 billion people lived on that small world. 8 billion people who were counting on her to save them. Admiral, her communications officer said, we're receiving a message from the Assembly observers. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Granted, tell them to go. They say they want to record this, for history. Almost laughed. History. What history would there be if they failed here? Who would be left to remember? Tell them they're welcome to stay and die with us, she said. But if they're going to run, they should run now. The observers, their small ship accelerated away from the fleet, heading for the safety of distant space, watched them go and felt nothing. She had expected nothing from them, and they had delivered exactly that. Admiral, her tactical officer said, Doctor's report has been distributed to the fleet. All ships are reconfiguring their weapons for electromagnetic pulse attacks. The mining vessels are preparing gravitational charges. Good. What's our estimated effectiveness? Unknown, ma'am. We've never fought these things before. No one has survived long enough to report back. Turned to face her bridge crew. They were young, most of them. Young and scared and trying very hard not to show it. She wished she could tell them that everything would be fine, that they would all survive this day. But she had never been a liar and she was not going to start now. You all know what we're facing, she said. You all know the odds. I'm not going to pretend this is anything other than what it is. We are probably going to die today, most of us, maybe all of us. The bridge was silent, no one moved. But we are not fighting to win, continued. We are fighting to buy time. Every minute we hold them here is another minute for the evacuation ships to escape. Every hour we survive is another million people who reach safety. That is our mission, not victory, survival, for as long as possible. She paused, looking at each of her officers in turn. I am proud of all of you. I am proud of this fleet. I am proud to be human today. Now, let's show the universe what that means. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. 14,000 ships, 42 million people, all of them listening, all of them waiting. This is Admiral, the swarm is 10 minutes out. Behind us is everything we have ever loved. Our children, our families, our history, our home. The galaxy gave up on itself. They hid in their bunkers and waited for death. But we are not the galaxy. We are human, and humans do not hide. She took a breath. Today we fight. Not because we think we can win, but because we refuse to let the light die without a battle. Today, we show every civilization in this galaxy that courage still exists. That hope still exists. that there are still people willing to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. The fleet was silent, waiting. Charge your weapons, prepare for combat, and remember this: every one of you is a hero. Every one of you has chosen to be here. That choice is what makes us human. Now, let's give them something to remember. The channel closed. The fleet began to move. 14,000 ships spreading into formation, turning to face the approaching darkness. The swarm came on like a tide, silent, relentless, unstoppable. Gave the order. All vessels fire. The space between the fleet and the swarm erupted in light. Electromagnetic pulses cascaded outward, ripping through the leading edge of the swarm. Gravitational charges detonated, creating wells of crushing force that pulled thousands of swarm units into themselves. Missiles and energy weapons and projectiles poured into the darkness, and for a moment, just a moment, the swarm faltered. Then it adapted. The swarm changed its formation, spreading thinner, moving faster. The weapons that had worked a moment ago became less effective. The darkness closed in. The first ships began to fall. Watched the tactical display, watching her people die. A fishing boat from Korea, crewed by 20 volunteers. A luxury yacht from Mars, carrying 50 engineers who had never fired a weapon in their lives. A cargo ship, a research vessel, a mining platform that had been someone's home for 30 years. They died and more took their places. They died and the fleet kept fighting. Admiral, her tactical officer said, his voice cracking, "We're losing too many ships. At this rate, we'll be destroyed in 3 hours. How long until the evacuation is complete?" 12 hours minimum. Closed her eyes. 3 hours. They needed 12. The math was impossible. Then a new voice came over the fleet channel. It was Captain, commanding the destroyer Steadfast. "Admiral, my ship is damaged. Engines are failing. Weapons are offline, but I have one thing left." Understood immediately. "Captain, no. We're dead anyway, Admiral. Let us die for something." His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "Steadfast is going in. All hands are in agreement. We're going to take as many of them with us as we can." The Steadfast broke formation, accelerating toward the heart of the swarm. Its crew had overloaded its reactor, turning the entire ship into a bomb. The swarm tried to stop it, but the Steadfast was moving too fast, too unpredictably. It reached the center of the swarm and detonated. The explosion was blinding. When it faded, a hole had been torn in the darkness, a hole that would take hours to fill. "My God," someone whispered. Stared at the display, at the gap where Captain and his crew had been, and then she began to laugh. Not with joy, with understanding. "All ships," she said. "New orders. We don't need to destroy them. We just need to hurt them. Make them pay for every inch. Make them remember that they fought humanity today." The fleet roared in response. More ships began to move, some of them damaged, some of them dying, all of them determined. The battle continued. And somewhere, far away, the first evacuation ship slipped into faster-than-light travel, carrying millions of humans to safety. The darkness was not winning. Not yet. The battle lasted 7 days. 7 days of fire and darkness. 7 days of ships dying and crews fighting to the last breath. 7 days of humanity standing alone against the endless tide. On the first day, they lost 3,000 ships. The swarm adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every desperate plan. But humanity adapted too. Mining ships began ramming swarm clusters, their crews evacuating at the last moment. Cargo vessels formed living shields around the smaller combat ships. Engineers found ways to boost the electromagnetic pulse weapons far beyond their design limits, burning out the systems but taking thousands of swarm units with them. On the second day, the assembly observers began transmitting. They had not left after all. They had hidden at the edge of the system, watching, recording, and now they were broadcasting everything they saw to the entire galaxy. "They're still fighting. the crystalline moderator reported, its voice filled with something like wonder. "The humans are still fighting. They have lost half their fleet and they are still fighting." On the third day, the first Allied ships arrived. No one had expected it. No one had dared to hope. But the hegemony had watched the broadcasts, and they had been ashamed. They had hidden behind their borders while a young species died for them. They could not live with that shame. The warships were ancient and powerful, their weapons far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. They tore into the swarm's flank, and for the first time, the darkness began to retreat. On the fourth day, more ships came. The collective of minds emerged from hiding, their vast machine intelligences analyzing the swarm and developing new weapons in real time. The Sung Empire, which everyone had believed destroyed, revealed that they had only been pretending to fall. They had been building, preparing, waiting for the right moment. The moment was now. On the fifth day, the swarm was surrounded. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching the tactical display transform. What had been a wall of red was now fragmenting, scattering, being pushed back. The darkness that had seemed unstoppable was finally being stopped. "Admiral," her communications officer said, "incoming message from the commander." The alien's face appeared on the screen. It was a tall, four-armed being with silver skin and black eyes. Its expression was difficult to read, but its voice carried deep emotion. "Admiral, we owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You showed us what we had forgotten. That hope is not given, it is chosen." Nodded slowly. She was exhausted beyond words. She had not slept in 5 days. She had watched 20 million of her people die, but she was still standing. "You came," she said. "That's all that matters." On the 6th day, Doctor made her final discovery. She had been studying the swarm's retreat, analyzing the patterns in their movement, and she had found something extraordinary. "They're afraid," she reported to the fleet commanders. "They've never encountered anything like this before. They've consumed thousands of civilizations, and none of them fought back like this. None of them inspired others to fight. They don't understand what's happening, and it terrifies them." "Can we use that fear?" asked. "Yes, we push forward. We show them that we will never stop, that no matter how many they kill, more will come, that humanity, that the galaxy, is not just going to lie down and die." On the 7th day, the swarm broke. It was not a complete victory. The darkness did not simply vanish, but it retreated, scattering into the void between galaxies, fleeing from the light that had burned it so badly. When the firing finally stopped, sat down in her command chair and wept. 23 million humans had died. 2/3 of the fleet was gone. Earth itself had been, its atmosphere burned by swarm units that had broken through the defense lines. But the planet was still there. The people were still there. Humanity had survived. And the galaxy had remembered how to hope. 10 years later, Ambassador returned to the site of the battle. A monument floated there now, a sculpture of human hands reaching upward toward the stars. Around it orbited platforms bearing the names of the fallen. 23 million names, written in light against the darkness. She was not alone. Beside her stood representatives from every species that had fought in the final days of the battle. The commander who had been first to answer the call. The Sung Emperor who had revealed his people's survival at the crucial moment. The collective, represented by a holographic avatar of swirling light. And there were others, species that had been born after the war, civilizations that had risen in the decades since the swarm's retreat. They had come to see the monument, to understand what had happened here. A young alien approached. It was from a species she did not recognize, its body covered in iridescent scales that shifted color as it moved. "You are human?" it asked. "I am. My people were not spacefaring during the war. We only emerged 5 years ago." The alien gestured at the monument, at the names burning in the void. "We learned about this in our first contact with the assembly. It is the first thing every new species learns now, the story of the war, the story of humanity. Was silent, waiting. "Why did you do it?" the alien asked. "Your species was so young, your technology was so limited, the mathematics said you would lose. Why did you fight?" Looked at the names. She found her brother's name among them. He had died on the third day, commanding a converted fishing boat that had destroyed a swarm cluster before being overwhelmed. She found Captain's name, and Sergeant's, and the old shuttle pilot who had flown until her ship was shot out from under her. "Because someone had to," she said finally. "Because the universe was dark and getting darker, and we refused to accept that. Because we believed that hope was worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible." The alien considered this for a long time. "My people have learned a new word," it said eventually. "We borrowed it from your language, hero. We teach our children that when the universe required heroes, only humanity answered." Smiled sadly. "That's not quite true. The collective came, the sun came, humanity just went first. We reminded the galaxy that heroes existed everywhere, that hope existed everywhere. We just showed them it was possible to fight back." She looked at the alien, at its young eyes full of wonder and questions. "The lesson of the war is not that humanity is special," she said. "The lesson is that anyone can be a hero, anyone can choose to stand against the darkness, anyone can inspire others to do the same. We just happen to be the ones who made that choice first." The monument turned slowly in the void, the names of the fallen catching the light of distant stars. Around it, ships from 100 different species held silent vigil, honoring the sacrifice that had saved them all. And somewhere, far away in the darkness between galaxies, the swarm drifted and waited and remembered. It remembered the small blue world that had refused to die. It remembered the young species that had taught the universe to fight back. And for the first time in its eternal existence, it was afraid. The stars burned on, bright and eternal. The darkness still existed. It would always exist. But now there was something else in the universe too, something that the swarm had never encountered before. Hope. And hope, humanity had proven, was the most powerful weapon of all.